Yes, good evening everyone and welcome back to the Football Tribe UG channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another episode on your favorite football updates channel. Today, we'll be discussing why I think Manchester City will be Arsenal's biggest title rivals in as far as the pursuit of the Premier League is concerned this season. Pep Guardiola is pushing for his 7th Premier League title in his 10th year in charge at the club, while Mikel Arteta is still pursuing his first Premier League title as Arsenal manager going into the 7th year. Of course, he makes his 6th anniversary this coming December for how long he's been at the club. So really, looking at this, following Manchester City's emphatic victory against Liverpool over the weekend at the Etihad Stadium, winning that game by 3-0 thanks to goals by Brad Erling Haaland and Nico Gonzalez, as well as Jeremy Doku. I thought that victory was a statement victory enough to say that Manchester City are going to be up in the mix of the Premier League title. Now, I must reflect and reiterate that going back at the start of the season, in my own predictions, my predictions had it that Manchester City would finish 4th on the Premier League log, with Liverpool 2nd, Arsenal crowned champions, with Chelsea coming 3rd. Well, have I started changing my thoughts about those predictions of the top 4? I think it is safe to say that my predictions or my feelings about some of those teams are beginning to shift, particularly when it comes to Liverpool. Will they finish 2nd? I'm starting to have doubts because it is only November the 10th and they have already lost 5 Premier League games. Now, according to an experienced former Premier League manager in Arsene Wenger, he says, if you lose 5 Premier League games by November, then surely you shouldn't be counting yourself on the Premier League title. Of course, mathematically, as we have come on to describe or to discuss on numerous occasions, for those of you that follow our channel more regularly, that's for every day's broadcast, morning and evening, morning at 9 a.m. and in the evening at 11 p.m. You must know that we have said pretty much that mathematically the Premier League title is still there for the taking. But being realistic in terms of how many games teams go on to lose or can be allowed to lose and yet still win the Premier League title, then losing 5 by November is not always on the cards. You know, you lose 5 by November, then you can't really kiss that title goodbye, because then you're tempted to assume that you will win all your remaining games. Released, your opponents, your title opponents, will lose just as many. Liverpool last season lost only 4 games. They lost to teams like Chelsea. Of course, by that time, they had already clinched the title. They lost to Nottingham Forest. They lost to Fulham by 3-2. So, in some of the games, the few games that they did lose last season. This season, they went on and lost 4 games on the spin against Crystal Palace, Man United, Chelsea, and Brentford. 1 against Aston Villa and lost to Manchester City. So, that's 5 defeats in 6 Premier League games. Of course, by Liverpool's own standards, it's a bad on their books. But like I've discussed before, it is not the first time that they are facing something like this. When you go back into that 2021-2022 Premier League season, in the aftermath of winning the Premier League title in 2020, they lost about 6 games in a run of 7 Premier League games. That was a period between February and March. During that time, they lost to teams like Fulham by 0-0. They lost to Leicester City by 2-0. They lost to Man City, I think by 4-1. They lost, a couple of other games. Really, the only game they won in between that run was they lost to Chelsea, was one of the teams they lost to. The only game they won in between there was the game against Sheffield United. I think that was by 2-0. So clearly, it's not the first time something like this is happening to Liverpool. They have been there before and found themselves in a similar situation on the back of a season in which they won the Premier League title. And we are talking, in sheer comparison, a better team wholeheartedly in terms of that Liverpool squad of 2021-2022 Premier League season compared to the one that they currently have, even though it is laden by a good number of stars, So, I think that loss to Liverpool, that loss for Liverpool against Manchester City, literally puts them out of the title frame. Like I've said, mathematically, they are well still within the title conversation, because while they sit 8th on the Premier League table after match day 11, you'll find that they are only 2 points off the 3rd place. And that's Chelsea, who have 20 points in 3rd place. Manchester City, who have 22 points, that's only 4 points ahead of Liverpool. So mathematically, it is still there for the taking. And Arsenal are only 8 points ahead of them. So they can't catch up with them mathematically. But that is also based upon the principle that then they are going to go ahead and win all their remaining games, or perhaps that they won't lose as much, and hope that all the other opponents in the conversation of the Premier League title will lose. Now, back to Man City. Now, the reason as to why I think Manchester City will be Arsenal's biggest title rivals, even though I myself predicted that they would finish a 4th, looks like I was wrong about that. And perhaps results could still change by the time we get to May. But for now that they have not yet changed, and things are looking the way they are, and they are second to Arsenal with only 4 points behind, clearly, they're going to be Arsenal's biggest title rivals. And here are my reasons to think as to why I think that is going to be the case. Number one, the experience of Pep Guardiola. He's been in the Premier League for 9 seasons, this being his 10th, and out of those 9 seasons, he's won the Premier League title on 6 different occasions. He did not win the Premier League title in his debut campaign, that was 2016-2017. Chelsea won it under Antonio Conte. Thereafter, he won it in 2017-2018, 2018-2019. Lost it to Liverpool in 2020, and then went on to set another record when he won it 4 consecutive times to become the first manager in the Premier League to win the accolade 4 consecutive times. Manchester United had previously won it on for 3 consecutive times in 2007, 2008, and 2009 before they were dethroned by Chelsea in 2010, that Chelsea that were under the charges of Carlo Ancelotti. Now, again, looking at how Manchester City are, of course, they are still a team in transition. A transition period that started, at least for them, by the nature of their own transfers and in terms of incomings and outgoings, dating back to sometime in January 2025, when they went on in the transfer window and signed Omar Mamouche, signed Kushanov, Victor Reis, and brought in Nico Gonzalez. They continued that in the summer, brought in Ryan Cherki, Ryan Ashnory, Gianluigi Donnarumma, James Trafford, Marcus Bentinelli. All those are players that Manchester City brought in the summer at Tijan Reinders to further reinforce or rebuild that team. Now, for many managers, it takes a bit of time to rebuild a team. I think one of the managers in Premier League history that was so good at transitioning his team gradually, really remaining winning or very, very competitive, was Sir Alex Ferguson. And I think Pep Guardiola is on the verge of doing that, or is actually doing that as we speak. Last season, they missed out on the Premier League title, of course. They finished 3rd, only 3 points behind a 2nd place Arsenal, who had finished 10 points behind the eventual champions Liverpool. Of course, they looked at their situation during the course of the season, and they started to act early as the January transfer window. That's why you had Omar Mamouche, and you can remember, I think he scored about 7 goals, or 8, thereabout, in his debut half season of the Premier League. And those goals were crucial to where Manchester City eventually finished. With the injury to Rodri, which did not help, their efforts last season and this season hasn't helped really much, because he's been in and out of the team. They are well aware of what that challenge is, but they have found solutions. We're talking about a Manchester City side that has played many of their games without the experience of Mateo Kovacic and Rodri, of course. You know, a Manchester City side that has lost Kevin De Bruyne, for whom many thought they would struggle with a bit of creativity, because there's not a player in the Premier League that has proven over the last 5 years, even if 2 years, that can be within the same frame with Kevin De Bruyne. None whatsoever. They've lost the experience of Ilkay Gundogan, you know. They've lost the experience of Ederson Morales in that backline. Let's not forget, as time went by, they've lost players like Emile Laporte, they've lost Joao Cancelo, they've lost Kyle Walker, was at point captain of the team. He left them in January to join AC Milan and eventually went to Burnley. So they are, by every account and measure, a team still in transition. And yet Pep Guardiola has still managed to assemble a very, very talented team. When you look at their squad depth, I think for me is point number 2. One, we've looked at the experience of the manager in Pep Guardiola, And his success yesterday against Liverpool, he was marking his 1,000th game as a manager. Of course, has more than 700 wins while at it. Let's look at their squad depth. Like I've told you, the goalkeepers, Gianluigi Donnarumma, currently they are de facto number 1. Steven Ortega is still well within that team. Sometimes you may even forget because he's not been given a playing time, because James Trafford is the de facto number 2, returning to the club after he was signed from Burnley, where he had joined, I think, at the start of the 2023-2024 campaign or something around that period. And then Marcus Bettinelli, who they signed from Chelsea. Now, you go to their defenders. Ruben Diaz, John Stones, Nathan Ake, Ryan Atinori, Kushanov, Joshko Gvardiol, Rico Royce, I mean, that's talent right there. And as we will see, it's not just talent, but also a blend of talent and experience. Not just experience in terms of player maturity, but also experience in what it means to win a Premier League title or winning titles. You go to their midfield, Tijan Reinders, Mateo Kovacic, Ryan Cherki, Nico Gonzalez, Rodri, Bernardo Silva, Matthias Nunes, Nico O'Reilly, Calvin Phillips. You can skip that one, he's not really in the frame. Phil Foden, Oscar Bob, David Mukasa. Now, David Mukasa, we've seen him chip in a couple of games, particularly in the EFL Cup. And then you look at their forwards. Braut Haaland, the best striker there is in the Premier League. 14 goals to his name after only 11 games. Omar Mamouche, the Egyptian. Of course, this one is going to be missed at some point during the December going into January, as he will be away with the Egyptian national team for the Africa Cup of Nations 2025 edition that will be hosted in Morocco. Of course, our very own Uganda Cranes will be up there. And I think on that note, therefore, I need to remind Liverpool fans that they will be without Mo Salah. I need to remind Manchester United fans that they will be without Brian Mbeumo. They will be without Amadou Diallo. They will be without Nusa Mazoroi. So that's just food for thought. Then you look at Jeremy Doku and Savinho. Now, their squad depth in front is not as big, really. But in the broader context of the entire squad, I think they're pretty thick. When you have a player like Braut Haaland, who literally scores for fun, then perhaps you do not need that big squad depth. The big question though, is how can Manchester City contend or fare without Braut Haaland if, let's say, you were to be injured for a period of 2 to 3 months? How can they cope without him? Pep Guardiola has been a manager known to find solutions, even when you least expected it. Of course, Omar Mamouche will be able to play there, but assuming Omar Mamouche is also not there, assuming they were suddenly laden with the kind of injuries that perhaps Arsenal faced last season, that perhaps Tottenham Hotspurs faced last season and continue to face through this season, would they still be the same team? Of course, if injuries become a factor for Manchester City, they cannot be the same team, because in front they lack squad depth. Savinho is not the kind of player that can promise you goals game in, game out. And Jeremy Doku, as excellent as he was against Liverpool, his performances are oftentimes inconsistent in terms of the execution. He has good dribbling, he has the pace, he has the physique, but that final touch oftentimes is disappointing. He's capable of giving you a great assist. He's capable of scoring a stunning goal like he did against Liverpool. But how often can he replicate that kind of performance? Unfortunately, based on what I've watched of him, it doesn't come too often, So that will be my reservation. But the other point I want to make is the experience of some of these players. Now, we've gone away from the experience of the manager. You have players that have already been part of a title-winning side in Manchester City, but Haaland, Jeremy Doku, when they were winning the 2024 Premier League title, Nathan Ake, Rodri, John Stones, Joshko Gvardiol, all these players have been there, Bernardo Silva. These are players that have been there. When you look at a player like Gianluigi Donnarumma, he's been winning league titles. He's done it with PSG, He's been a top player ever since he was about 19 years of age at AC Milan, You look at Tijan Reinders, who they signed from AC Milan. I think I stand to be corrected, but he probably was he was part of that squad that won under Stefano Pioli, that won the Scudetto. So that experience for me is good. So we've looked at the experience of the manager, we've looked at their squad depth, we've looked at the experience of the players in terms of winning a Premier League title. Then the other point Then the other point that I must make that is really, really crucial to all my views about this, that Man City will be Arsenal's biggest threat in terms of the pursuit of the Premier League title, is Brad Erling Haaland. Like I've said, he scores goals for fun. Every title-winning side needs that player that is going to stand out and bang in the goals, game in, game out. Of course, in some cases he will fire blanks, but at the end of the day, he's going to have that individual tally that is as high as you'd get them, that is as high as a winner of the Golden Boot would get. You remember last season, Mo Salah scored 28 goals, provided 18 assists, Premier League Player of the Year, Liverpool Player of the Year. He won it all. That's why Liverpool were able to win the Premier League title. Manchester City have that in Brad Erling Haaland. At the moment, he scored 99 goals in the Premier League ever since he joined Manchester City. He's bound to become the fastest player to reach 100 Premier League goals. So, what Brad Erling Haaland brings to this Manchester City team, I've not seen any single player bring to another team in the context of a forward player. Antoine Semenyo brings a bit of that for Bournemouth, but he's not at the levels of Brad Erling Haaland. That pretty much we know. Liverpool signed Alexander Isak, hoping he would transform his form from Newcastle last season, where he scored 23 goals and provided 6 assists, and transform that, bring it to this Liverpool side that they will to help them defend their Premier League title. But looks like he struggled in his start to his Liverpool career. Of course, he missed pre-season, therefore he wasn't fit at the start of the season. Then as he started to get to, reach full fitness, then he got injured, so it hasn't helped, Arsenal's Victor Gyökeres is still trying to find his footing. They've been without Kai Havertz. They've been, to say the least, they've been a bit unfortunate with injuries, even though they have a very, very decent squad. That's for Arsenal. But for me, those factors, Brad Erling Haaland, the experience of Pep Guardiola, the experience of some of the squad players, and the squad depth of Manchester City make them primed to rival Arsenal for the Premier League title. And not just to rival them. Part of that experience within the manager and the players is beating Arsenal twice to that Premier League title, coming off behind to beat them to the Premier League title. They did it in 2023. That was the 2022-2023 season, and the season after that, the 2023-2024 season. First, they beat them with a better tally of only 5 points, finishing at 89 points, while realist Arsenal finished at 84 points. The subsequent season, they finished with 2 points better than Arsenal, finishing at 91 points. Realist Arsenal finished at 89 points. So, that experience is what makes Manchester City be the biggest threat to Arsenal's title pursuit. Can Arsenal ride out any storms whatsoever that could come their way during the course of the season? We've entered November. It's already dubbed Black November. Not just for the fun of the word, but in historical context, it's happened to Arsenal before that they tend to struggle in November, a month in which they've already dropped points against Sunderland, and yet their next games in the Premier League will be against Tottenham Hotspur and Chelsea. In between there, a game against Bayern Munich in the UEFA Champions League. Do let me know what your thoughts are about those views. Otherwise, leave a comment down in the comment section, leave me a like on this video, and if you're new to the channel, kindly do not forget to subscribe. Thank you so much. You've been such a wonderful audience. I'll see you next time. Let's continue to engage. Give me your views.